and welcome once again to Living in the 21st Century. Joining me today is Dr. Pingyi Song. She's serves as Director of Activities at Coker University, South Carolina. Dr. Song, it's a pleasure to have you on today, and I'm very interested in hearing about your culture, blending with the American culture, so forth.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So would you mind just telling us a little bit about your cultural exchange of music, a little bit about yourself, etc.?
Yes. Right now I work at Coker University as a director of choral activity. So I teach two choruses, one mixed choir and one treble choir, and also some music classes. I just finished my doctorate at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro, and previous from that, I graduated from West Virginia University and Mansfield University of Pennsylvania, and Guangzhou University. So originally, I'm from China. I've been studying in the United States this is my ninth year coming up. So it's been a journey, and my background is all of my family lives in China, and I studied piano and voice when I growing up, and then going into conducting. So that's most of my educations are received in the United States.
Great, that's good news. I'm often a little amazed at how you can change the dynamics of cultural integration when it comes to the performing arts and the music form. And I would love you to basically explain of how the cultural exchange work in terms of music and so forth.
Yes, one of my main focus in my research is the promoting choral literatures from Eastern Asian choral musical cultures. So it's very interesting that the concept of harmony and the concept of choral music that with multiple sections singing together is not rooted in the traditional Eastern Asian countries. So many of the composers we see now, especially in the choral composition, many of them received education from the United States or the European countries or Russia, and many of the composers still does seek degrees around the Western world. But many of the other composers who receive their music education locally, they also receive a system of Western European music education system that was brought in to their country around the early 19th, 20th century. It depends on which country we talk about. Japan started a bit earlier in Eastern Asia that they have brought the music education system in Japan in the Meiji Restoration, and then later many Chinese scholars and musicians studied it in Japan and also around the world, bring that Western European concept of music education back in. So that's where when the Chinese or the local Eastern Asian musicians started to study the Western concept, including the classical music, bel canto technique, and composition, the harmony, the structure of the harmony. So that is a completely new concept that contrasting the traditional. For example, in China, we have the pentatonics, and we have a system of the Chinese music theory, including the scale. The same situation happens in Japan and Korea. They have their own system of scale that differs from our major minor or the church mode in the Western world. So based on those scales and those local instruments that we have, the instrument orchestra accompanying the traditional opera, which is completely different from our Western concept. So those two combinations are very fascinating to me as a children growing up. Growing up locally in China, I see how the Chinese music theory and the harmony that right now it merged a little bit, but decades ago is still a very independent system. Like if you study Chinese music, you will be a Chinese instrumentalist, or you sing traditional opera in Chinese opera, Peking opera, those traditional opera. But nowadays, more musicians receive more Western European music education. So they also learn solfege. They also learn major minor mode. They also learn oral skills and Western music theory. And even though if they study as Chinese musicians, so I see it comes both ways for musicians growing up like me who receive both sides of the tradition. And now I'm a conductor, so I study more of the choral music. That's where I see most of the repertoire performed in the United States are very Western European dominated. So that's why I started to promote some more compositions that composed by Eastern Asian composers.
Beautiful. One thing I often like to think about music, it has a common language that everyone understands, and it literally brings the world together. And I see the reason more and more every day why it's essential that we should have cultural exchange in music. And it just doesn't only function from the standpoint of getting good music and enjoying it and so forth, but it also alters one perspective about life, politically, socially, even in some cases economically. How important it is that you think that musicians of all cross sections of the world, is imperative that they come to acknowledge other people's music, that it can bring about a more common understanding of how people function and operate in this society, hence bring about more respect to one's culture and so forth.
Yes, I think that is the beauty that draws me into this career of choral music. They are particularly in music with lyric. This power is more powerful, and the lyric plays more important part in choral music and solo vocal music. In instrumental music, there is still the background and the history and why the composer composed this piece, but and we do talk about it in rehearsal, but it's not as important as the lyrics in choral music. So in the choral classroom, I see here in the United States from K-12 all the way to collegiate level, professional level, we perform like more and more nowadays, many of the schools, and it's essential to program and perform with an inclusive mindset. And I personally, I program lots of multicultural pieces. And for me, I program from inside out and outside in. That is a both way. Let me explain this. So when I look at my student body, when I look at my student demography, I see some cultures that they come from, that they already have a musical background as they grow up, the music they listen, the style they are familiar in. So sometimes I try to recognize that by programming contemporary American composers and also many musical styles that we sing. And when also I look at their repertoire that we have been performing in the past decade, past 5 years, what music have we in certain school or ensemble have been performing? So and what pieces do we not perform? So in this semester in my choir, we have a love themed concert in February, and coming up in April, we have two concerts this semester. I programmed in Hebrew languages and also in Russian languages. I also programmed in French languages. And right now we're starting to study one in Korean languages. So besides all the lyric that we learn, the diction and all of those concepts, those essential subjects that we learn, technique that we learn to perform those foreign languages, we it's definitely important that we talk about this music. Where does it come from? Why do we sing it? What does the lyric means? And if we do not communicate that lyric, that emotion, then it cannot go past us and touch the audience. So as a conductor, I select the repertoire, so it sort of generated for me. So I try to introduce a new piece to the student. Sometimes there is a curiosity. We started a Arabic piece from Egypt just last week, and that's many of our students' first time singing in that harmonic language, in that Arabic Egyptian scale, and also in Arabic language. So it's it's just as simple and as consistent as anybody will learn a new piece of music. Right now, we are very used to, if we learn opera, we learn Bach. We go back to the historic informed performance practice that we learn how to perform Baroque style, how to perform a classical style. But it's just the same thing that we learn how to perform a gospel piece, how to perform a spiritual piece, which is different than your gospel, and how do we approach the dialect in gospel spiritual piece? How do we perform in Korean language, and how do we perform in different musical tradition and musical cultural language, harmony, and all of those? It's just the same hard work and same preparation for your Bach piece as your multicultural piece. I think that's nowadays more and more people realize that you just cannot just pull a Chinese piece and just try to perform it. You got to study it as hard as you prepare and score study for your Mozart piece.
Great. It's something I'm thinking about here in terms of potential economic values. And if you want to go back to the time of Mozart, Sebastian, Tchaikovsky, and the list goes on for those old classical composers and so forth, and you look at most recent people like Andrea Bocelli, Andre Roy, who has like a multiplicity of followers in their swing of music. How would we tailor now in this generation going forward to meet such a mass gathering to support their art form? Now, you just basically discuss how you're doing it, and that is beautiful. We live in a modern generation with strange taste buds. How we can now prep for these strange taste buds that our younger generation know that into music or the art form would be able to penetrate that market and make make some economic well-being for themselves. How do we work with those kind of people?
Yes, I think is a very important question and very important lens that we look at our nowadays music education, starting from K-12. I think many of the students are required to take choir or band or orchestra as their classes growing up. I think in our K-12 public music education, there are more and more music educators are informing their repertoire by this inclusive and multicultural sense. So students can get the experience in the ensemble that we promote more multicultural music. Also in the classical music realm, when we look at the structure, certainly it is structured to have some choir performed in the Western European cultural, such as the Bach Academy, many main city has it, and like the Mendelssohn Choir, Pittsburgh have one, and Philadelphia has one, and there are societies who are dedicated to perform those. But as well as we look at nowadays choral concerts, there are more elderly attending choral concerts, and that is a factor. And how do we reach the younger audience? That's another problem that's heavy on our heart as music educators and choral directors. So I think it is not that the music is not as attractive as the Western European concept or harmony. I think it's the promoting also. It's a marketing promoting. If you perform Beethoven 9, it's gonna be mostly a full house. People want to hear Beethoven 9 at least once a time live in their lifetime. But if you performed a orchestral piece by Chen Yi, it might not click in the audience heart as like, I gotta go see that concert. So there is that promotion, that economic effect that we have to keep in mind if you look at professional ensembles. But in music education, definitely is the time that we start to introduce the as many musical language as we can. That also happens in the music appreciation classes, which is also heading toward a good direction. That no longer we talk about the Western European music history, will also include multicultural ethnomusicology and different music cultural. Sometimes it's difficult for us to pick up our instrument, just perform gamelan music for the first time. But at least in music appreciation classes, we get to watch them and we get to experience that cultural, and we get to see how gamelan music tie into Debussy's music when Debussy heard it first time in Paris and for gamelan music. So those are closely it's a close net, the music, especially going to contemporary and the 21st century in music history. Those composers also look in the multicultural lens to get their inspirations. So I think it's important that we start those conversations, and we can introduce them in the younger classrooms in the K-12 classroom.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I recognize over the years that there are thousands of students every year who go to like Berkeley, and they study their music. And you know, it's funny that there's a huge elaborate student loan, and I see often where these kids will either do a little gig or sometimes voluntarily give their music. And I saw the situation where you have graduates with music actually volunteering their music just to keep playing and being active, but there's still a big student loan. Is there a direction or a new dimension you can advise young people who are getting into music, like to form groups, professional groups, where they can start to establish themselves and make money from it, rather than just going their separate ways after college and giving their talent away for free after there's a school loan to pay and these type of things? What would be best advice you would have for students like this?
Yes, I think if I understand the question correctly, the students are, I think it's difficult to say that if a college student graduated and they want to start a rock band, or their popular music, or they become a DJ at some occasion. So I think everybody have their preference, right? Everybody
Yes.
have their hobby, and it is like I study when I study in musicology class. It's not about one music is better than the other or is more valued than the other. It's different taste. It's different flavor. You have balanced dish on your dinner table. You also need to have a really multicultural and multi lens of the music cultural that you in your music education. So once you receive a multicultural lens of music education, then still you find yourself attracted to one musical cultural that is your hobby and that is your choice, and that's a totally fair choice. And we need people in all musical styles to promote their music in able to keep a vividly live musical cultural that you can see more and more. So with that said, I have many students in my past experience who are attracted to play in the Middle East ensemble at UNCG, UNC Greensboro. That is a elective, I think, for many students, that maybe they do not know Middle East instruments, but they're interested, so they can sit in rehearsals and look at the rehearsals, and if they want to join, they can start an instrument and pick an instrument, start learning it. So I have a pipa student who is a music education major from China, learned pipa. It's a Chinese string instrument, played this way, 4-string instrument, pipa. But she play banjo in old time ensemble. So it's easy for her to pick up that fingerings and that techniques to study more banjo as her journey in the United States. So I see many people. Sometimes we do not have those opportunities for our children to explore the musical culture. That is the part of the job that I'm trying to do, and many of my fellow music educators in K-12, also in the collegiate music education world, is try to expose as much as musical language to them, that they see beyond their own musical cultural. They see like with a jazz background student, they can know more jazz than I can, because they grew up with it. Maybe their parents are jazz musicians. They can tell me and educate me a whole lot about jazz. And I grew up from China. I can introduce in depth that the Chinese music has that history and has that harmony, and that is the beauty that we don't have to do it all. I don't have to be the person that I know all of the thing. I certainly can be the person introduce the student to a musical culture, and I have my specialty. But it is the beauty that the world that is big enough for everybody to bloom. So I deeply believe in that, and I try to, like I said, in music education, try to expose and let our students explore more. Even though maybe at first many students are not very much so in love with 12 tones. But the first time they heard it, like, wow, 12 tones, it's just a new musical language, and it's just chant music and serial music. And that it's just totally foreign to our music theory students at first. But once you go behind the reason why those composers compose in 12 tone and why it's so important and different in the music history that has been happening before them, and why is it significant for us to study, that's a beauty in even in the Western European music that we study 12 tone, and we some people graduated and compose with serial music. Like we have the great composer Morten Lauritsen in choral music, who mastered this technique and still compose in this style. So I think those things are important in our music education.
That's great. One final thing, other question I want to ask. As you see the integration of cultural music come together, do you also see the necessity for, rather than individualism, more groups coming together and harmonizing as one, playing a variation of different cultural music from their experiences that can get in the minds of present day society, that they can come to more support that kind of music and inculcate different experiences on their journey?
Yes, I think it's definitely necessary. And we see many of the ensemble singing happening voluntarily at some tragedy scenes. That's the power of singing together. And at that moment, you feel supported. You feel harmony or not. There is the power when people gathering and sing together and communicate that emotion together when we see in many occasions. So I think for me, it lays a burden on our conductors, especially if you are leading an ensemble. I think one have to reflect and think about why do they become a conductor and what is the leadership needs to be. We are so very much used to the leadership of conductor being the teacher on the podium, the maestro, the know-it-all, and they have to know, otherwise, why am I playing under your baton? And those conversations, those stereotypes started to broke up, I think, in this decades, and more as we see leader and leadership are more servant leadership. What can I bring to my ensemble? As a director, how can I see my ensemble strength as well as their weakness? Where do we strengthen, like we perform and we are very easy to get that and perform that musical style right away. That is our strength. But where is the musical language that we're lacking to study and lacking to learn, and that we need to explore, and we need to at least give ourselves a chance to try it. I think many of the music educators are kind of intimidated when we talk about, like you mentioned, the Mandarin Chinese lyric diction. When we look at a language or a musical language from a different cultural, sometimes it's easy for us to shrink back to our comfort zone, to our self bubble. Like I just perform contemporary American composers, and that solely sells the tickets, and we're fine. We're singing beautifully. That's true, but also I think as a music educator and ambassador of cultural exchange, that I try to make more as much as I can to some presentations at conferences, like I just did at the National American Choral Director Association conference in Cincinnati 2 weeks ago. So there are several topics that we can talk about. The first is what I call the fantastic pieces and where to find them. Many of the music educators don't have that in our education system, even in the graduate level when we study choral literature, song literature. we don't have that. We don't have the education from many the repertoires of where do we find those pieces? Who are those composers? We don't have the knowledge of that.
Okay.
And once we have that repertoire, how do we perform it? That's the next topic and the step of performance practice. How do we prepare it? Okay. So I think those are topic and journeys for music educators, for directors, and for conductors to start with.
Well, thank you, Dr. Song. It's really a pleasure having you on here. And I'm sure this won't be the last time I'm hearing from you. We keep in touch. And I'll be sure to send the link when it comes to us. And for all those who have been tuning in or living in the 21st century, I want to say to you, have a nice day.